Some debts aren't written in ledgers, they're written in people. Nadia learned that on a Thursday. The rain had been going since morning, the kind that doesn't announce itself. It just arrives and stays, soaking through the gaps in the window frame above the kitchen sink, pooling on the linoleum in a thin, cold sheet. She'd laid a dish towel over it. The dish towel was already dark. Her stepfather's voice carried from the living room, low and even, the way it always got when he was explaining something he considered final. She heard her mother answer, not words, just the shape of agreement. A soft sound, a closing sound. Nadia stood at the counter and looked at the numbers in front of her. The notebook was spiral-bound, the cover bent back from years of being shoved into her bag. Column after column, neat and precise. Rent, utilities, the pharmacy invoice her mother kept pretending wasn't overdue, the loan payment Gerald had taken against the house without telling anyone until the first notice arrived in June. She'd built the columns herself because no one else was going to. She'd been building them since she was 15, sitting at this same counter, trying to make numbers that didn't work somehow work anyway. They didn't work now. They hadn't worked for a long time. But this time the gap wasn't something she could close by picking up a weekend shift at the copy center or selling the last of her grandmother's silver. This time the gap had a name, Holt Financial Services, and the number beside it had 7 digits. She closed the notebook. She already knew what Gerald was going to say before he appeared in the doorway, still wearing his jacket, hands tucked into his pockets the way he did when he'd already decided something. "There's someone coming tomorrow," he said. "A business associate. He's going to look at you." Nadia didn't move. "Look at me. He needs someone with your kind of skills. Bookkeeping. Accounts." Gerald shrugged. The gesture practiced into meaninglessness. "He pays well. Who is he?" "That's not something you need to know tonight." She looked at him for a long time. Gerald met her eyes just long enough to establish that he wasn't ashamed, and then he looked at a point slightly past her shoulder. "And the debt," she said. "He'll clear it, all of it, all of it." Nadia picked up the notebook. She set it on top of the refrigerator where it always went. She didn't ask what happened if she said no, because she already knew the answer to that too. There were 4 people in this house, and she was the only one still working, and the number beside Holt Financial Services had 7 digits. "Fine," she said. Gerald nodded and went back to the living room. Her mother didn't come to find her. The car arrived at 8 in the morning. Black, long, no plates she could read in the rain. A man in a dark coat opened the rear door and held it open without looking at her, the way people open doors for cargo. Nadia got in with a single bag. She'd packed the notebook. The drive took 40 minutes. She watched the city give way to a stretch of industrial corridor, and then to something else. Wide gates, a gravel drive lined with trees too uniform to be natural, a house that was not what she'd expected. Not a mansion, something older. Stone, weathered, the windows narrow and high. A building that had been built to outlast the people inside it. Inside, a woman named Mrs. Fenwick, grey-haired, expressionless, showed her to a room on the 2nd floor and told her she would be expected in the study at 9. The room was clean. There was a window. The door didn't lock from the outside. Nadia sat on the edge of the bed and breathed. At 9, Mrs. Fenwick came back and led her down a hallway and through a door into a room lined with shelves, papers, and the kind of organized disorder that only looks accidental. 2 men stood near the far window. One of them turned when she entered. The other didn't. The one who turned was someone's assistant. She could tell by the way he held his tablet, angled for showing, not reading. The one who didn't turn was Voss. She found out his name later. At that moment, he was simply the man standing at the window with his back to her, broad-shouldered, dark jacket, the kind of stillness that isn't calm but is something adjacent to it. Controlled, deliberate. When he finally turned, she had the distinct impression that he'd already finished whatever calculation he'd been running, and she was simply the final variable confirmed. He looked at her the way she'd looked at the columns in her notebook. Not unkind, not cruel. Measuring. "You kept the accounts for Mercer Distribution," he said. It wasn't a question. "For 3 years," she said, "you found the discrepancy, 14,000 over 11 months. Yes, And you reported it to the wrong person, she said, which is how I ended up unemployed. Something shifted in his expression. Not a smile, exactly. A small recalibration. He sat, across from her, not behind the desk, which surprised her, and set a folder on the table between them. He opened it without ceremony. These are the accounts for 6 subsidiary operations, he said. I've had 3 people look at them in the last 8 months. None of them found what I know is there. Nadia looked at the top page, then she looked up. What do you think is there? Someone skimming, slowly, patiently. He watched her. The kind of person who understands that the safest theft is the one that looks like noise. She looked back at the page. How long have you known? Long enough to be certain, not long enough to prove it. And what happens when you can prove it? He paused. It was a brief pause, but she caught it. That's not your concern, he said. It is if I'm the one finding the proof. He looked at her for a moment longer than was comfortable. The debt against your family's property will be cleared when you deliver me a name with evidence I can use. You'll receive a salary during your time here. You'll have access to the full ledger system. He leaned back slightly. You won't leave the grounds without an escort. You won't contact anyone at your former place of employment. You won't discuss your work here with anyone outside this room. And if I find nothing, you'll find something. Otherwise, Gerald Fitch would not have told me your name. Nadia looked at the folder. 7 years of accounts across 6 operations organized by fiscal quarter, each sheet dense with transaction codes she'd need to map before she could read. I'll need a proper desk, she said, and actual coffee, not whatever that was Mrs. Fenwick gave me. The desk they gave her was in a room off the east corridor, a long table, good light, a laptop with access to the full encrypted ledger system. The coffee was better than she'd hoped. Mrs. Fenwick brought it without comment, and thereafter seemed to regard her as simply another feature of the house, like the good lamp in the hallway or the broken 3rd step on the back stairs. The guards existed but stayed peripheral. She saw them at meals. There was a kitchen staff, a shared dining room for household personnel, and occasionally in the corridor, but they didn't hover. No one watched her work. Voss she barely saw at all for the first week. She learned the shape of his absence before she learned the shape of his presence. The sounds of him leaving before 7 in the morning, returning after dark. Voices in the study that went quiet when she passed. The occasional brief appearance in the hallway where he would glance at her, not stopping, just cataloguing, and continue on. The work itself was absorbing in a way she hadn't expected. Not because it was complicated. It was complicated, but that wasn't the interesting part. The interesting part was the pattern. Someone had been careful, meticulous. The kind of careful that develops over time, that starts small and learns from its own mistakes and gets better. She recognized it because she'd built her own version of careful at the kitchen counter with a spiral notebook, trying to cover gaps that weren't her fault. She didn't feel sympathy exactly, but she understood the architecture. By the end of the 2nd week, she'd found 3 anomalies. Individually, they were explainable. Together, they pointed to a single routing path that had been established quietly, incrementally, using 2 shell transactions buried in legitimate freight invoices. On a Sunday evening, she brought the 3 pages to the study. Voss was at his desk this time. He looked up when she knocked, and she was struck again by the fact that he looked tired, not distressed, not weakened, just tired, the way a structure gets tired, still holding but showing the weight. I have a thread, she said. I can't pull it until I cross-reference the freight manifests for Q3 and Q4 of last year. I don't have access to those. He looked at the pages she'd set on the desk. He read them slowly. Then he picked up his phone and made a call, 3 words, and set it down. You'll have access by morning, he said. She started to leave. Sit down, he said. She sat. He poured 2 glasses of something amber from the decanter on his desk and pushed one toward her side of the table. She didn't usually drink, but she took it. How did you learn accounts, he said. It wasn't the question she'd expected. My grandmother, she said. She ran a mail-order business. She made me record everything, every stamp, every return. She said if you don't write down where the money goes, it goes without you knowing. Voss turned the glass in his fingers. She sounds precise. She was the only precise thing in my family. That's usually how it works, he said, in a way that suggested he wasn't only talking about her. She looked at him across the desk. In the lamplight, the scar along his jaw was more visible, a long, fine line from ear to chin, old enough to be faded. She'd noticed it before and hadn't stared. She didn't stare now. "Were you always in this business?" she said. He was quiet for a moment. "I was in a different kind of accounting," he said finally, "before I understood what I was actually counting." It was more than she'd expected from him. She didn't push it. She finished the drink. It was good. She set the glass down and stood. "I'll have something more concrete by Tuesday," she said. He nodded once. She left. Tuesday came and went. By Thursday she had it, a name, 2 accounts, and a timeline that stretched back 4 years and 11 months. The total was significant. Not catastrophic for an operation of this size, but significant, and more importantly, deliberate. This wasn't someone who'd dipped into the till. This was someone who'd built a parallel structure inside the existing one, patient as mold. She brought it to Voss on a Thursday evening. He read through everything slowly. He asked 3 questions. When the accounts were opened, whether the signature patterns were consistent, whether she could demonstrate the routing was intentional versus processing error. She answered all 3. He asked her to wait. 20 minutes later, a man she hadn't seen before came through the study door, exchanged a look with Voss, and left. Voss came back to the desk. "It's Aldrin," he said, "my logistics coordinator for the Eastern Corridor." She nodded. She'd suspected a name in operations. She hadn't known which one. "You're certain?" he said. "The routing path was established 9 days after he'd transferred into that role. The timing isn't coincidental." She paused. "There's one more thing." He looked up. He wasn't working alone. There's a second signature in the Q3 manifests. "I don't have a name yet, but the transaction patterns suggest someone inside the financial administration, someone with cleaner access than Aldrin had." She set a second folder on the desk. "I thought you should know before anything moves." Voss looked at the folder. He looked at her. "How long have you known about the second signature?" he says. 3 days. "Why didn't you bring it sooner?" "Because I wanted to be certain," she said, "and because I didn't want whoever it is to know I was looking." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Most people in your position would have brought me the first name as fast as possible and collected the payment and left." "I know," she said. "Why didn't you?" She thought about the notebook on top of the refrigerator, the columns, the 7-digit number that had been there so long it felt like furniture. "Because doing half the job isn't doing the job," she said. "And because if someone inside your financial administration is involved, and you move on Aldrin without knowing who else is there, they'll have time to clean up. And then the debt is cleared and the problem isn't." He looked at her for a long time. "Stay," he said. "I'm sorry. Stay on the job. Find the second name." He leaned forward slightly, elbows on the desk, and for the first time he looked at her not like a variable but like someone he was deciding to trust, which she understood was not a thing he did casually. "I'll double the rate. I don't need double the rate." "What do you need?" She thought about it honestly. "I need the debt cleared now, not when I finish, so that isn't what's keeping me here." He studied her. Then he picked up his phone and made another call. 2 sentences. He set it down. "Done," he said. "I'll have confirmation to you by tomorrow morning." She nodded. She didn't say thank you, and he didn't expect her to. The second name took another 3 weeks. During those 3 weeks, the house became, gradually and without ceremony, something different than what it had started as. Not warmer exactly, but less transactional. Mrs. Fenwick stopped knocking and simply left the coffee. The guard who accompanied her on the twice-weekly drive to the records archive started waiting in the car without being asked. She learned the broken 3rd step by memory. She and Voss fell into an odd rhythm of late evenings. Not planned. Simply. She worked late, he worked late, and the study was the best lit room in the house. They didn't always talk. Sometimes she sat across from him with the ledgers, and he dealt with whatever required his attention, and neither of them acknowledged the other for an hour at a time. But sometimes they talked. Not about the accounts. Not about business, about things that were harder to articulate, about what it cost to hold things together that other people let fall apart, about the specific exhaustion of being the person who notices everything. He told her once, unprompted, that he'd started in the business because it was the only structure available to him. Structure is structure, he said. At a certain age, you don't ask about the walls, you just need something that holds. She understood that. She told him about the notebook. He listened without interrupting, which was something she hadn't expected. "You've been doing someone else's accounting your whole life," he said when she finished. "Haven't you?" she said. He was quiet. "Yes," he said after a moment. "But I chose whose." She thought about that for a long time afterward. The second name was a woman named Hendricks, administrative director for 3 of the 6 subsidiaries. She'd been with the organization for 11 years. Voss had, by all accounts, trusted her completely. Nadia brought him the file on a Wednesday night, when the house was quiet, and the rain was back, lighter this time, just a presence against the windows. He sat very still when he read it. She watched him go through each page, and she watched the thing that happened to his face, which was not anger exactly, something more controlled than anger, something that had learned to move past shock into strategy so efficiently that the grief in between was almost invisible. Almost. "Are you sure?" he said when he reached the last page. "I am," she said. "I'm sorry." He looked up. He seemed to register the word that she'd said sorry, not just delivered information. "She was the one who recommended Aldrin," he said. "I know. I found that in the hiring records. It's in the back of the file." He closed the folder. He set it down with the particular flatness of a man setting down something heavy that he will not pick back up. "You did more than I hired you to do," he said. "You hired me to find it. I found it. I hired you to find a problem. You found the whole architecture." "Same thing," she said. He looked at her. "It isn't, actually." He was quiet for a moment. "What do you want to surprise her?" "What? After this, what do you want?" She hadn't thought about it in those terms. For so long there had been the notebook, the columns, the next overdue notice, the next gap. What came after the gap was not something she'd let herself think about. "Something that's mine," she said. "I don't know exactly what that looks like yet, but mine." He nodded slowly. "I have a financial oversight position," he said, "for the legitimate operations, property management, hospitality holdings, the construction subsidiary." He paused. "No ledgers that will require you to stay silent about what you find." "You'd trust me with that," she said. It wasn't skeptical. She was genuinely asking. "You've had access to everything I have for 6 weeks," he said. "And you found things that would have taken down half of what I've built. You brought them to me." He looked at her steadily. "Yes, I'd trust you with that. They moved on Aldrin on a Friday. Nadia wasn't present for it. She was at the kitchen table in the house, her table now, in some working sense, when she heard the vehicles leave and return. The details didn't reach her, and she didn't ask for them. Hendricks was handled differently. She was given the opportunity to resign, and was escorted from the grounds with her personal effects, and a very clear understanding of the conversation she would not be having with anyone about this or any related matter. Nadia had suggested this, not out of softness, but because Hendricks had also, buried in the accounts, been quietly covering a liability that would have been catastrophic for 2 of the subsidiaries if it had surfaced unmanaged. Her reasons for being there were complicated. The betrayal was real, but people were rarely only one thing. Voss listened to her reasoning and agreed. It surprised her, a little, every time he did that. The day she moved into the small office off the main hall. Real furniture. Her name on the access list for the legitimate books, coffee already on the desk. She stood in the doorway for a moment and looked at it. She'd spent 15 years being the person who cleaned up someone else's math, who saw what no one else wanted to see and said so to people who didn't want to hear it and paid for it anyway. She'd done it out of necessity, and then out of habit, and then because she couldn't stop, the way you can't stop seeing a crooked line in a room full of straight ones. She sat down. She opened the first ledger. She turned to the first column. The numbers were clean, genuinely clean. She read them twice to be sure. Then she picked up her pen and began. Voss found her there at 7 that evening. He stopped in the doorway. She'd left it open, and looked at her in a way he'd started doing more often lately. Not measuring, not calculating, just looking. "Still here," he said. "The Q4 projections are a mess," she said, without looking up. "Whoever did these last year didn't account for the holdover liability from the Portland property." "I know," he said. "That's why you're here." She looked up then. He was leaning against the doorframe, jacket off, the tiredness still present in him the way it always was, but underneath it something else. Something that had, in the past weeks, slowly decided to surface. "I'm going to fix it," she said. "I know that too," he said. They looked at each other across the room, across the desk, across the particular and specific distance of two people who understand the same kind of weight, and have been, for longer than either of them planned, carrying it together. "I made a reservation," he said. "For dinner. Off the grounds, if you want." Nadia looked at the Q4 projections. She looked at him. "An hour," she said. "Let me finish this page," he smiled. Not the small recalibration she'd seen in the first week, something fuller than that, something that had been waiting for the right moment to show itself. "Take your time," he said. She turned back to the ledger. Outside, the rain had stopped. Through the narrow window, she could see the sky going orange at the edge, the kind of ending that looks like it cost something, the kind that, if you've been paying attention, means something better is coming. She turned the page. She found the discrepancy on the third line. She fixed it, noted it, moved on. She'd always been good at this, finding what didn't add up and making it right. For the first time in a very long time, she was doing it for herself.